Michael Mitchell stood at the entrance of his childhood home, luggage in hand, wondering if he'd made a mistake. 5 years had passed since he'd last set foot in this house. 5 years since the argument that had torn his family apart. The faded blue two-story colonial looked smaller than he remembered, its paint peeling at the corners, the front garden slightly overgrown. He took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The sound echoed inside, followed by footsteps approaching. The door swung open, and there stood his sister Emma, her expression shifting from casual curiosity to shock. "Mike," she said, not quite a question, not quite a greeting. "Hey, Em." He shifted awkwardly. "Dad called. Said I should come." Emma tucked a strand of honey-brown hair behind her ear, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. "He didn't tell me you were coming today." "That sounds like Dad," Michael replied. "Can I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. The house smelled the same. A mix of old books, pine-scented cleaner, and that indefinable scent he'd always associated with home. Family photos still lined the hallway, though he noticed his graduation picture was missing from the arrangement. "Where is everyone?" Michael asked, setting his bag down. "Dad's at physical therapy. Aunt Judith is with him. And Mom." Emma's voice trailed off. "Mom what?" "She's upstairs. She's having a rough day." Emma lowered her voice. "The new medication makes her tired." Michael nodded, feeling the familiar weight of guilt. He hadn't been here for any of it. His father's stroke 3 months ago, his mother's worsening depression, the burden that had fallen entirely on Emma's shoulders. "I made coffee," Emma said, walking toward the kitchen. "I assume you still drink it black?" "Some things don't change," he replied, following her. The kitchen had been remodeled, new cabinets, new countertops, a space he no longer recognized. Emma handed him a mug and leaned against the counter, studying him. "You look good," she said finally. "Boston agrees with you." "It's fine. The firm keeps me busy." He took a sip of coffee. "You look tired." "Gee, thanks." "I didn't mean it like that," Michael said. "I just meant, this can't be easy." Emma sighed. "It's not. But we're managing." Some of us didn't have the luxury of walking away. There it was, the first jab. Michael felt himself tensing up, the old defensive walls rising. "I didn't walk away from the family. I walked away from the business." Which to Dad was the same thing. "Mitchell and Sons was killing him before the stroke did," Michael said. "And it would have killed me too." Emma shook her head. "You really don't get it, do you? The business was everything to him. 3 generations. And you just..." The front door opened, interrupting whatever Emma was about to say. There Aunt Judith's voice called out, "Emma? We're home." Emma gave Michael a look that clearly said their conversation wasn't over, then went to help their father. Michael stayed in the kitchen, taking the moment to collect himself. When he finally walked into the living room, his father was settled in a recliner, looking smaller and frilier than Michael had ever seen him. Robert Mitchell's eyes widened slightly when he saw his son. "You came." "You asked me to," Michael replied. "I wasn't sure you would." His father's voice was slightly slurred from the stroke, but the steely undertone remained unchanged. Aunt Judith, their mother's sister, stepped between them as if sensing the tension. "Michael, it's so good to see you," she said, giving him a warm hug. "Your mother will be thrilled." "How is she, really?" Michael asked. Judith exchanged glances with Emma. "She has good days and bad days. The stroke was hard on her too, you know." "I'd like to see her," Michael said. "She's resting," Emma replied. "Dinner's at 6. You can see her then." Michael nodded, suddenly feeling like an outsider in his own family home. He excused himself to take his bags upstairs to his old bedroom, which had been preserved like a time capsule. High school trophies still on the shelves, faded posters on the walls, the twin bed that was now too small for his adult frame. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out his phone, staring at the screen without really seeing it. Coming back meant facing everything he'd left behind: the family expectations, the unresolved arguments, the weight of tradition. When Michael came back downstairs, he found his father alone in the living room, staring out the window. "Where's Emma?" Michael asked. "Grocery store with Judith." His father's gaze remained fixed on the window. "Sit down." Michael took the chair across from him. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "Why do you ask me to come home, Dad?" Michael finally asked. Robert Mitchell turned to face his son. "Because it's time we dealt with what happens to Mitchell and Sons. I thought Emma was running things now." "She is. And she's doing a damn good job." His father adjusted himself in the chair. but there are decisions that need to be made. About the future. I made my decision 5 years ago, Michael said firmly. I'm not coming back to run the company. His father's face hardened. This isn't about what you want anymore. This is about what's best for the family. Is that why you didn't tell them I was coming? You wanted to ambush all of us. I didn't want arguments before you even got here. Robert pointed to a folder on the coffee table. Everything's in there. The company financials, the estate planning, the options we have. Michael didn't touch the folder. What aren't you telling me? His father held his gaze for a long moment, then looked away. The business is in trouble. Has been since before my stroke. Emma's been keeping it afloat, but he shook his head. The Mitchell legacy might end with me after all. Before Michael could respond, they heard the front door open, followed by Emma's voice calling that they were back. His father quickly said, "We'll talk more later. Don't mention this to your sister yet." And just like that, Michael found himself caught in a web of family secrets again, the very thing he'd left to escape. As Emma and Aunt Judith brought in groceries, the tension in the room felt like a physical presence, an empty chair at the family table that no one wanted to acknowledge. Dinner was a careful exercise in avoidance. They talked about the weather, Emma's garden, Aunt Judith's book club, anything but the real reason Michael had returned. Their mother, Elizabeth, had joined them briefly, her movements slow and deliberate as she picked at her food. She'd hugged Michael when she first saw him, holding on a beat too long, but said little throughout the meal. After dinner, when their parents had retired upstairs and Aunt Judith was washing dishes, Emma cornered Michael in the hallway. "What did Dad say to you?" she asked, arms crossed. "When you were alone." Michael considered lying, but thought better of it. He mentioned the business was in trouble. Emma's expression tightened. "Did he show you the books?" "No, just said we needed to talk about it." "We," Emma repeated, a bitter edge to her voice. 5 years you've been gone, and suddenly it's we again. "I didn't ask to be dragged into this," Michael said defensively. "Dad called me, remember?" Emma studied him for a moment. "Meet me in the garage in 10 minutes. There's something you need to see." The Mitchell family garage had long ago ceased to house cars. Instead, it had become a storage space and makeshift office, with a desk in one corner where their father had often retreated to work on weekends. Emma was already there when Michael entered, sorting through a filing cabinet. "Close the door," she said without looking up. Michael did as instructed. "What's going on, Emma?" She pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the desk. "This is what Dad didn't show you." She opened it to reveal financial statements, loan documents, and legal notices. Mitchell & Sons is more than just in trouble. We're 3 months away from bankruptcy. Michael leafed through the papers, the numbers painting a grim picture. "How did it get this bad? The business was solid when I left." "Was it?" Emma's tone was challenging. "Or did you just not see the cracks because you were so focused on getting out?" "That's not fair." "Life isn't fair, Mike." Emma sat on the edge of the desk. "Dad started making risky investments about 7 years ago. Real estate deals, expansion into markets we didn't understand. By the time you left, we were already leveraged to the hilt." Michael frowned. He never said anything. "Of course not. You were the golden boy, the Harvard Business School graduate who was going to take Mitchell & Sons to the next level. He didn't want to disappoint you." Emma's voice wavered slightly. "Then you left, and everything just accelerated. So this is my fault." Michael felt the old anger rising. "I'm responsible for Dad's bad business decisions because I decided not to waste my life in a company I never wanted to join in the first place." "No," Emma said, surprising him. "It's not your fault, but your leaving broke something in him. He started taking bigger risks, trying to prove something." She pushed a particular document toward him. "Look at the date on this loan." Michael examined it. "This was 3 weeks after I left for Boston. $2 million, secured against the house, the business property, everything." Emma's eyes met his. He called it the resurrection loan. Said it would turn everything around. "Jesus," Michael muttered. The implications were sinking in. "So if the business goes under, we lose everything. The house, the business property, Dad's retirement savings." Emma ran a hand through her hair. "I've been trying to keep things afloat, but I'm not you, Mike. I didn't go to Harvard. I was supposed to be the one who handled the day-to-day operations while you were the visionary." The guilt that had been simmering since his arrival threatened to overwhelm Michael. "Why didn't you call me? Before it got this bad?" "Dad wouldn't let me. And then..." She gestured vaguely. "His stroke. Mom falling apart. It all happened so fast." Michael leaned against a stack of boxes, trying to process everything. What does Dad expect me to do? I can't just wave a magic wand and fix this. I don't know, Emma admitted. But there's more. She pulled another document from the folder. This is from Dad's estate attorney. He had it drawn up 2 weeks ago, after his stroke. Michael scanned the document, his confusion growing. He's transferring control of the company to me? What about you? Keep reading. Michael continued through the legal jargon until he reached a clause that made his blood run cold. He's making me executor of the estate and giving me sole discretion on whether to sell the company. He looked up at Emma. Why would he do this? Emma's smile was sad. Because despite everything, he still believes you'll make the right choice. She gathered the papers back into the folder. There's an offer on the table. Wesley Development wants to buy our properties for the land value. It would cover the debts, maybe leave enough for Mom's care, but the Mitchell name would be gone. The magnitude of the situation was finally hitting Michael. And what do you want? I want my brother back, Emma said simply. I've spent 5 years being angry at you for leaving, for making me stay behind and deal with everything. But that's not fair either. You had every right to live your own life. Michael felt a lump in his throat. No, let me finish. She took a deep breath. I don't know if the business can be saved, but I do know we can't make this decision while we're still carrying all this resentment. Dad messed up. You left. I stayed. We all made choices. Now we need to decide what happens next, together. Before Michael could respond, the garage door opened. Their mother stood there, looking more alert than she had at dinner. Your father's asking for both of you, she said quietly. As they walked back to the house, Michael stopped Emma with a hand on her arm. Why didn't you tell me all this earlier today? I needed to know if you were here to actually help, or just to go through the motions and leave again. She studied his face. I'm still not sure. Their father was sitting up in bed when they entered the room, a small wooden box in his lap that Michael recognized as the family keepsake box, a handcrafted container that had belonged to their grandfather. Sit down, Robert Mitchell said, his voice stronger than it had been earlier. It's time we cleared the air. Emma and Michael exchanged glances as they took seats on either side of the bed. Their mother stood by the door, arms wrapped around herself as if bracing for impact. Robert opened the box and pulled out a yellowed envelope. Before we talk about the business, there's something you both need to know. He looked between his children, his expression grave. Something I should have told you years ago. Dad? Emma started, concern evident in her voice. No, let him speak, Elizabeth said from the doorway, her voice barely above a whisper. It's time. Robert Mitchell handed the envelope to Michael. Open it, he said, and then you'll understand why I've made the decisions I have. Michael looked at the envelope, suddenly afraid of what it might contain. The family secrets had always run deeper than anyone acknowledged. That much he'd always known. But as he began to tear open the seal, he wondered if he was ready to face what lay inside. The document inside the envelope was a deed, old, but well-preserved. Michael scanned it, confusion giving way to disbelief. This says Grandpa Mitchell never owned the land where the business sits, he said slowly. It says he was leasing it from the Wesley family on a 99-year term. Keep reading, his father urged. Michael flipped to the second page, where an amendment was attached. The lease terminates upon the death of the last surviving child of William Mitchell, unless... He looked up at his father. Unless the Wesleys agree to a renewal or sale, which they never intended to do, Robert said bitterly. James Wesley has been waiting for this moment for decades, waiting for me to die so he could reclaim what his family considers rightfully theirs. Emma took the document from Michael, her eyes widening as she read. But the business has been there for over 70 years. We've made improvements, built structures. Doesn't that count for anything? Read the fine print, Robert said. All improvements become property of the landowner upon lease termination. That's why the business is in trouble, Michael realized. The land it sits on isn't actually an asset we own. It's worse than that, their father replied. When your grandfather set up the business, he used the lease as collateral for loans. Every generation of Mitchells has operated under the assumption that we own that land. All our financing, our credit lines, everything is built on that assumption. But how is that possible? Emma asked. Wouldn't banks have checked the deed? Their mother spoke up from the doorway, her voice steadier than it had been all day. Robert altered the records. When his father died and he took over, he made changes to protect the business. Michael stared at his father in shock. You falsified property records? I did what I had to do to preserve what my father built, Robert said defensively. For 30 years, it worked. We expanded. We thrived. We built something that mattered. Until James Wesley figured it out, Emma guessed. Robert nodded. About 8 years ago, he came to me with copies of the original documents. Said his father had kept them in a safe deposit box with instructions to wait until the right moment. The timing suddenly clicked for Michael. That's when you started making those risky investments. You were trying to make enough money to buy the land outright before anyone found out. I almost succeeded, Robert said, a flash of his old pride showing through. But the recession hit, investments failed, and then I left, Michael finished. And you tried even riskier ventures. I was desperate, their father admitted. The Wesleys gave me a deadline. Either come up with the money to buy the land at their price, or they'd expose the fraud and take everything. Emma stood up abruptly, pacing the small room. All those times you told me not to worry about the finances, that you had it under control. You were drowning, and you never said a word. I was protecting you, Robert insisted. No, Emma shot back. You were protecting your pride, your precious legacy. Michael's mind was racing, connecting dots that had eluded him for years. The argument we had before I left, when you accused me of abandoning my responsibility to the family. This is what you were really talking about, wasn't it? You needed me to help cover this up. Robert Mitchell looked away, unable to meet his son's gaze. The silence that followed was answer enough. Oh my God, Michael stood up, feeling sick. You wanted me to take over so that when this all came crashing down, it would be on my watch, not yours. That's not fair, their mother interjected. Your father was trying to protect all of us. By committing fraud, Michael's voice rose. By hiding the truth from his own children? How is that protection? Mike, Emma said quietly, laying a hand on his arm. This isn't helping. Michael shook her off, the betrayal cutting too deep. All those years you hammered into me the importance of the Mitchell name, of integrity in business. Was that all a lie too? I made mistakes, Robert admitted, his voice breaking. Terrible mistakes. But everything I did for this family. No, Michael said firmly. You did it for yourself. For your ego. The room fell silent except for their father's labored breathing. Finally, Emma spoke up. What does James Wesley want now? After your stroke? Robert gestured to the folder still in Emma's hands. The offer you found. He's willing to buy out the remaining debt. Let us keep the house, in exchange for a clean transfer of the business properties and all assets, and our silence about the original arrangement. So either way, we lose the business, Emma said. Unless we can raise enough capital to meet his price for the land, Robert replied. $3 million by the end of the month. Michael let out a bitter laugh. That's why you called me back. You thought I could somehow pull $3 million out of thin air. I called you back because you deserve to know the truth before it all falls apart, his father said. And because, despite everything, you're still my son. A Mitchell. A name that won't mean anything once this gets out, Michael pointed out. Elizabeth Mitchell stepped forward, her fragility momentarily replaced by determination. That's enough. All of you. She looked between her husband and children. We're still a family. Damaged, yes. Imperfect, certainly. But still a family. She took the deed from Emma's hands and returned it to the wooden box. Tomorrow, we'll talk about options. Tonight, I want all of you to remember that there are things more important than business, than money, than reputation. As if to emphasize her point, she took Robert's hand in hers, a gesture of solidarity that surprised them all. We'll face this together. Later that night, Michael stood at his bedroom window, staring out at the neighborhood he'd grown up in. The truth was still settling in his mind. The family business, the legacy he'd rejected, had been built on a lie. Part of him wanted to walk away again, to return to Boston and his separate life. But another part, the part that had followed Emma to the garage earlier, knew he couldn't. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Emma stood in the doorway, 2 glasses and a bottle of their father's whiskey in hand. Thought you might need this, she said, pouring 2 generous servings. She handed him a glass and clinked hers against it. To the Mitchell family, in all its dysfunctional glory. Michael couldn't help but smile slightly as he took a sip. I can't believe any of this. I've had a few hours longer to process it than you have, Emma replied, sitting on the edge of his bed. I'm somewhere between rage and resignation. What are we going to do? Emma swirled the amber liquid in her glass. I don't know, but I've been thinking about something Dad said, about the Wesleys waiting for the right moment. It seems personal, doesn't it? Like there's more to this story than just a land dispute. Michael nodded slowly. You're right. 3 generations of waiting, just to reclaim a piece of commercial property? There's something we're still missing. I say we find out what that is, Emma proposed, before we make any decisions about the offer. Michael asked, raising an eyebrow. Unless you've got a plane to catch. There was challenge in her voice, but also hope. Michael thought about his apartment in Boston, his job at the consulting firm, the life he'd built to escape the very complications that now surrounded him. But looking at his sister, seeing the weight she'd carried alone for 5 years, he knew there was only one answer. No, he said finally. No plane to catch. I'm staying. Emma's relief was palpable. Good, she said, pouring them each another finger of whiskey. Because the Mitchell siblings have some digging to do. And I have a feeling James Wesley isn't going to like what we find. Michael raised his glass. To digging up the past. And maybe, Emma added, to finally burying it properly. As they drank, Michael felt something shift between them. The first step toward healing a rift that had seemed unbridgeable just hours ago. Whatever came next, whatever secrets still lurked in the Mitchell family history, at least they would face it together. Downstairs, in the dim light of the kitchen, Robert Mitchell sat alone, the weight of decades of secrets visible in the slump of his shoulders. He opened a small address book, turning to a page he hadn't looked at in years. The number might not even work anymore, but it was the only card he had left to play. For his children's sake, he had to try. He picked up the phone and dialed, holding his breath as it rang. When a voice answered on the other end, he spoke just 4 words. It's Mitchell. We need to talk. Morning arrived with the sound of rain tapping against the window. Michael woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where he was. The familiar crack in his childhood bedroom ceiling brought reality rushing back. The family business, his father's deception, the Wesley ultimatum. He checked his phone. 3 missed calls from his boss in Boston and a text asking when he'd be back. He set the phone aside without responding. Downstairs, Emma was already at the kitchen table, laptop open, surrounded by stacks of folders. Their mother sat across from her, looking more alert than she had yesterday, a notepad in front of her filled with neat handwriting. You're up? Emma said without looking away from her screen. Coffee's fresh. Michael poured himself a cup. Where's Dad? Doctor's appointment, their mother replied. Aunt Judith took him. Emma turned her laptop so Michael could see the screen. I've been doing some research on the Wesleys. Did you know they owned half the county back in the 1920s? Old money, railroad investments, then real estate. Michael leaned closer, examining the old newspaper article she'd found. What happened? The Depression, Elizabeth answered. The Wesleys lost almost everything. Had to sell off properties piece by piece. Except the land our business sits on, Emma added. They leased that instead. To Grandpa Mitchell. Michael frowned. But why lease just that piece instead of selling it like the others? That's what I've been trying to figure out. Emma clicked through more browser tabs. I found records of sales for most of their holdings between 1929 and 1934, but nothing about our property. It's like they specifically held on to it. Elizabeth sipped her tea. Your father might know more, but he's never been forthcoming about the details. Even to me. The fact that their mother was actively participating in this investigation surprised Michael. For as long as he could remember, Elizabeth Mitchell had been a background figure in family business matters, supportive but uninvolved. Now she seemed determined, focused. Mom, he said carefully, did you know about the lease situation before Dad's stroke? She met his gaze steadily. I knew something was wrong. The way your father would lock himself in the study late at night, the phone calls he'd take in private. The drinking got worse. She twisted her wedding ring. When he finally told me, after the first meeting with James Wesley, I was furious. Not just about the deception, but because he wouldn't ask for help. Sounds familiar, Emma muttered. Elizabeth nodded. The Mitchell men and their pride. She reached across the table and squeezed Emma's hand. I should have pushed harder, gotten involved sooner. Maybe things wouldn't have gotten so bad. Or maybe they would have, Michael said. Dad made his choices. Speaking of choices, Emma said, turning back to her laptop. I think I found something interesting. The Town Historical Society has digitized a bunch of old records, including property disputes. She pointed to an article from 1952. Look at this. There was a lawsuit between Grandpa Mitchell and Howard Wesley, James's father, over property boundaries. Grandpa won. Michael read over her shoulder. It says the disputed area included access to Miller Creek. He looked up. Isn't that the stream that runs behind the business complex? Emma nodded. The one Dad always said was worthless because it flooded every spring. Let me see that, Elizabeth said, taking the laptop. She scanned the article, her brow furrowing. This mentions an easement agreement as part of the settlement. I've never heard your father mention that. We need to see the actual court records, Michael decided. And we should visit the property today. There might be something we're missing. Emma closed the laptop. I've managed the business for 5 years and never questioned why we never developed the back lot, even when we needed the space. Dad always said it wasn't worth the hassle because of the creek. I think we're on to something, Michael said, a spark of the old Mitchell determination igniting in him. Get dressed. We're going to the courthouse first, then the property. 2 hours later, they stood in the county records office, poring over the complete file of Mitchell versus Wesley. The elderly clerk who'd helped them find it had raised an eyebrow when they requested it. Haven't seen anyone look at that one in years, she'd said. Not since James Wesley came by. Oh, must be 8 or 9 years ago now. The lawsuit revealed far more than a simple boundary dispute. Howard Wesley had claimed that William Mitchell had violated terms of their original agreement by building structures too close to Miller Creek. The judge had ruled in Mitchell's favor, but included specific restrictions on future development near the water. Listen to this, Michael said, reading from the judge's decision. The lessee maintains right of access to Miller Creek for business purposes as stipulated, but may not alter, redirect, or impede the natural flow of said waterway. Emma frowned. Business purposes? What business would Grandpa have with a creek? I don't know, but there's more. Michael flipped to another page. There's a reference to an addendum to the original lease, dated 1933, that specifically mentions water rights. That addendum isn't in here, Emma said, checking through the file again. No, but there's a clue where to look. Michael pointed to a notation in the margin. It references something called the Mitchell-Wesley Accord filed with Sullivan and Walsh, attorneys. Elizabeth looked up sharply. Sullivan and Walsh was your grandfather's law firm. Your father used them too, until about 10 years ago when he suddenly switched to Baker and Hoffman. Right around when the trouble with the Wesleys started, Emma noted. We need to find that accord, Michael said. They left the courthouse and drove directly to the Mitchell and Sons property, a sprawling complex that housed the company's offices, warehouses, and manufacturing facilities. To Michael, it looked smaller than he remembered, the buildings showing signs of deferred maintenance that hadn't been visible in his father's day. Emma parked behind the main office building. Most of the staff is gone. We've been downsizing for months. They walked the property, making their way toward the back lot that bordered Miller Creek. What had once been a pristine, babbling stream was now a muddy trickle choked with debris. Dad always said this area flooded too much to be useful, Emma remarked, picking her way through tall grass. But looking at it now, I'm not so sure. The creek bed is lower than most of the property. Michael knelt by the water's edge, examining the soil. This doesn't make sense. Why would water rights to this be important enough to specifically mention in a lease from the 1930s? It's barely a creek anymore. Emma looked around thoughtfully. Maybe it's not about the water itself, but what's under it or near it. She pointed upstream. The creek comes from the hills on the Wesley estate, cuts through our property, then winds through town before joining the river. Michael stood up, a thought forming. What if we're thinking too small? Dad always taught us to look at the bigger picture in business. He climbed up the small embankment to get a better view. Emma, when was the last time anyone tested this water? I don't think we ever have, she admitted. Why would we? Michael pulled out his phone and opened a map application, zooming out to see the larger area. The Wesley estate is upstream. Their land encompasses the headwaters of this creek. He looked back at the trickle of water with new interest. I think we need to take a sample. Emma's eyes widened as she caught on. You think there's something in the water? After all this time? I think, Michael said slowly, that there's a reason the Wesleys never sold this land, and why they're so determined to get it back now. They walked back to the car in silence, both lost in thought. As they drove away, neither noticed the black SUV parked across the street, or the man inside taking photos of them with a telephoto lens. That evening, As they shared their discoveries with their parents, Robert Mitchell listened with a mixture of surprise and resignation. "The water rights," he said finally. "I knew they were mentioned in the original documents, but I never understood why they mattered. The creek's been nearly dry for decades." "But it wasn't always," Elizabeth pointed out. "Not when your father first leased the land." Robert shook his head. "I need to tell you something else. Something I learned just this morning." He looked at his children with weary eyes. "James Wesley isn't just trying to reclaim family property. There's been a preliminary geological survey of the region." He paused. "They think there might be natural gas deposits running through this entire area, including under our property. Valuable ones." Emma gasped. "That's why he's pushing now, after all these years." "And why the original lease specified water rights," Michael added. They knew, even back then, that there might be something valuable in that area. "If that's true," Emma said, "then the price he's offering for the land is nowhere near what it's actually worth." Robert nodded grimly. "Which is exactly why he's using the lease termination and my improprieties as leverage. If this gets out, we lose everything and possibly face legal consequences. If we take his offer, he gets the land for a fraction of its potential value." "So what do we do?" Emma asked, looking between her father and brother. Before either could answer, the doorbell rang. Elizabeth went to answer it, returning moments later with a troubled expression. "It's James Wesley," she said quietly. "He says he needs to speak with all of us." Now, James Wesley was not what Michael had expected. Instead of the ruthless business tycoon he'd imagined, the man standing in their living room was surprisingly ordinary, mid-60s, with silver-streaked hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent time outdoors. He wore a simple blazer over jeans, his only concession to wealth a gleaming watch that caught the light when he moved. "I apologize for dropping by unannounced," Wesley said, his tone measured and polite. "But I heard there was some activity at the property today." Michael and Emma exchanged glances. So they had been watched. Robert Mitchell sat stiffly in his armchair, his expression guarded. "James, what can we do for you?" Wesley remained standing, hands clasped behind his back. "I thought we had an understanding, Robert. The terms of my offer were clear and time-sensitive." "We're still considering it," Robert replied evenly. "Are you?" Wesley's gaze shifted to Michael. "Or are you looking for ways around it? I understand your son has been making inquiries about the old lawsuit." The fact that Wesley knew about their courthouse visit confirmed Michael's suspicion that they were being monitored. He stepped forward, meeting the older man's gaze directly. "I'm Michael Mitchell." "I know who you are," Wesley replied. "The prodigal son returns. How's the consulting business in Boston?" Michael felt a chill at the casual display of knowledge about his life. "It's fine, but at the moment, I'm more interested in why you're so eager to reclaim land your family has been content to lease out for 70 years. A flicker of something, annoyance? Respect, crossed Wesley's face. Direct, like your grandfather. He glanced at Robert. Your father prefers a more circuitous approach. Mr. Wesley, Emma interjected, we know about the natural gas survey. If Wesley was surprised by this revelation, he didn't show it. Instead, he smiled slightly. And here I thought the Mitchell investigative skills had died with William. He turned to address Robert. You should have told them everything from the beginning. This could have been settled more amicably. Told us what? Michael demanded. Wesley looked between the Mitchell family members, seeming to make a decision. Perhaps we should all sit down. This is a longer conversation than I anticipated. Once they were seated, Wesley leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The relationship between our families has always been complicated. What you found today at the courthouse was just the tip of the iceberg. The Mitchell-Wesley Accord, Emma said. Yes. Wesley nodded. A private agreement between my grandfather and yours, outlining terms beyond the basic lease. We haven't been able to locate a copy, Michael admitted. I have the original, Wesley said. One of the few documents my father deemed important enough to preserve through our financial hardships. Elizabeth, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Why not simply tell us what it says? Wesley considered her for a moment. Because, Mrs. Mitchell, without the context, you wouldn't understand its importance. He turned back to Robert. Your father never told you the full story, did he? About how the lease came about in the first place. Robert shook his head slowly. He said it was a business arrangement. That Edward Wesley needed cash during the Depression and our family needed land to expand. That's partially true, Wesley acknowledged. But there was more to it. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. In 1933, my grandfather Edward discovered something on that property, evidence of natural resources. But he lacked the capital to develop it, and banks weren't lending, especially not to families who had already lost most of their wealth. So he turned to our grandfather, Michael surmised. William Mitchell was one of the few businessmen in town still turning a profit, Wesley confirmed. Edward approached him with a proposal, a partnership to develop the resources. But that's not what happened, Emma said. No. Wesley's expression hardened slightly. Instead, William convinced my grandfather to enter into this lease arrangement. 99 years, with specific provisions regarding water rights and mineral rights. Robert frowned. I've never seen anything about mineral rights in the documents. That's because those provisions were in the accord, not the lease itself, Wesley explained. William Mitchell promised to use his capital to help develop any resources found on the property. The profits would be split, with the Mitchells receiving 60% for their investment and the Wesleys 40% as the original landowners. Michael was beginning to see the picture, but our grandfather never followed through on that part of the agreement. No, Wesley said flatly. Once he had control of the land, he focused on building his manufacturing business. The exploration and development of resources was perpetually delayed. My grandfather died still believing those promises would be fulfilled. That doesn't explain why your family didn't enforce the agreement, Emma pointed out. Or why you're only pushing this issue now. Wesley smiled thinly. The accord included a clause that the terms couldn't be enforced until either the lease expired or all children of the original signatories had passed away. My father was bound by it, legally, and, he believed, morally. But you're not, Michael concluded. I respected my father's wishes during his lifetime, Wesley said. He died last year. I'm now free to pursue what's rightfully ours. Robert shifted uncomfortably. The natural gas survey, how long have you known? We've suspected for decades, Wesley replied. But modern geological techniques have only recently confirmed it. The deposits extend under a significant portion of the old Wesley holdings, including the land your business occupies. Michael processed this information. And the lawsuit in the 50s? Over the creek boundaries. My father believed your grandfather was secretly testing the water for signs of natural gas or other resources, despite the agreement to pursue that jointly. Wesley's tone was matter-of-fact. He tried to restrict access to the creek as a way of forcing William to honor the original agreement. But he lost, Emma said. The judge ruled on the strict terms of the lease, not the private accord, Wesley acknowledged. And so the pattern continued, the Mitchells using the land for their manufacturing, ignoring the potential beneath it, while the Wesleys waited for their chance to reclaim what they saw as their birthright. The living room fell silent as the Mitchells absorbed this information. Michael glanced at his father, whose face showed a complex mixture of emotions. Anger, guilt, resignation. I never knew, Robert said finally. My father never told me about any partnership agreement. When I took over the business, he just said to make sure we maintained control of the property at all costs. Wesley's expression softened slightly. I believe you. Just as I believe you didn't know about the potential value when you altered those property records. He leaned back in his chair. But that doesn't change our current situation. Which is? Michael asked. I'm offering you a way out, Wesley said. Take my deal. Walk away with enough to secure your parents' retirement and future. Or fight me and risk losing everything. Including your freedom, Robert. That's blackmail, Emma said hotly. It's business, Wesley corrected. The same kind of business your grandfather conducted with mine. If what you're saying about the natural gas is true, Michael said, then your offer significantly undervalues the property. Perhaps, Wesley conceded. But it's more than you'd get if I simply reported the fraudulent records and waited for the lease to terminate upon Robert's death. Which, forgive me for being blunt, might not be far off given his health. Elizabeth stood suddenly, her normally gentle demeanor replaced by cold anger. I think you should leave now, Mr. Wesley. Wesley nodded, rising to his feet. Of course. I've said what I came to say. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, placing it on the coffee table. My offer stands until the end of the month. After that, I'll have no choice but to pursue other avenues. He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at Michael. You know, your grandfather wasn't entirely wrong. He recognized opportunity when he saw it. The question is, what will you do with yours? After Wesley left, the Mitchells remained in stunned silence until Emma finally spoke. Do we believe him? About the accord? It would explain a lot, Michael said. Why the Wesleys never sold that particular piece of land. Why they've been so focused on getting it back. Robert rubbed his temples. If he's telling the truth, then my father built our family business on a broken promise. Everything we have came from betraying a partnership. We don't know that for certain, Elizabeth insisted. Not without seeing this accord ourselves. Michael picked up Wesley's business card, turning it over in his hands. There's only one way to find out. What are you thinking? Emma asked. I'm thinking we need to see that document, Michael replied. And then we need to conduct our own resource survey of the property. Wesley would never allow that, Robert said. He doesn't have to know, Michael countered. Not yet, anyway. He pocketed the business card. If that land really does contain valuable natural gas deposits, we have more leverage than Wesley thinks. Emma eyed her brother warily. You're not suggesting we try to outmaneuver him? He's been planning this for decades. So have the Mitchells, apparently, Michael said, a new determination in his voice. Even if we didn't know it. Later that night, after their parents had gone to bed, Emma found Michael in the kitchen, sketching out a rough map of the property on a notepad. You're really going all in on this, aren't you? She asked, sliding into a chair across from him. Michael looked up. I spent 5 years trying to escape this family and its legacy. Now I find out everything I thought I knew about that legacy might be built on a lie. He set down his pen. I need to know the truth, Em, before I can decide what to do next. And if Wesley's right? If Grandpa did swindle his family? Michael considered this. Then we have some hard choices to make. About what kind of family business we want to be, if we want to be one at all. Emma studied her brother's face. You know, for someone who ran away from all this, you look remarkably at home in the middle of a Mitchell family crisis. Maybe I am, Michael admitted, surprising himself with the realization. Or maybe I just needed to understand what I was running from in the first place. Emma reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Whatever we find out, whatever we decide, we do it together this time. No more secrets. No more secrets, Michael agreed, though he wondered if any family could truly live up to such a promise. The Mitchells certainly never had before. The Mitchell-Wesley Accord lay on the coffee table between them, its yellowed pages carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. James Wesley sat opposite Michael and Emma, his expression unreadable as they finished reading the document. Now you understand, he said quietly. Michael sat back, processing everything he'd just read. 3 days had passed since Wesley's unexpected visit to their home. After careful consideration, Michael had called the number on the business card, requesting to see the accord. To his surprise, Wesley had agreed immediately, inviting them to his office. This language is explicit, Emma said, tapping a paragraph on the second page. Our grandfather definitely agreed to invest in resource exploration and share any profits. And the deadline for beginning that exploration was supposed to be 1938, Michael added. 5 years after signing. Wesley nodded. The Depression was ending. The economy was recovering. There was no longer any excuse for delay. So what happened? Michael asked. War happened, Wesley replied. With Europe heading toward conflict, William Mitchell converted his factories to support military production. Lucrative government contracts, guaranteed profits. He shrugged. Who could blame him for focusing on the sure thing rather than the speculative venture? And after the war? Emma pressed. More excuses. More delays. Wesley's tone remained even, but his eyes revealed old frustration. By then, the manufacturing business was booming. William had no incentive to honor an agreement that would only split his profits with a family he already had over a barrel. Michael studied Wesley's face. You said your father wouldn't challenge this during his lifetime. What? Honor, Wesley said simply. He believed a man's word was binding, even if his father's had been broken. He refused to seek legal remedy until all parties bound by the original agreements had passed. He sighed. He was a better man than I am. And you've been waiting all this time, Emma said, not bothering to hide her skepticism. Not just waiting, Wesley corrected. Preparing, gathering evidence, building a case. The fraudulent property records your father created simply gave me additional leverage. He leaned forward. I want what's rightfully mine, what should have been my father's, and his father's before him. Michael gestured to the accord. According to this, What's rightfully yours is 40% of any resources developed on the property, not the property itself. Wesley smiled thinly. Very good, Mr. Mitchell. You found the core of the matter. He steepled his fingers. Yes, legally, the accord would entitle my family to a partnership share. But that was contingent on your grandfather initiating the exploration and development by 1938. He failed to meet that obligation, which, according to paragraph 12, renders the entire agreement subject to renegotiation. Emma flipped to the relevant paragraph, reading it carefully. It doesn't automatically void the agreement, though. No, Wesley conceded. It doesn't, which is why I'm willing to negotiate rather than simply pursue legal action. Michael exchanged glances with Emma before responding. We had an independent geological survey done yesterday. Preliminary results confirm significant natural gas deposits. If Wesley was surprised by this revelation, he hit it well. As I told you, the estimates value the potential extraction at considerably more than your offer for the property, Michael continued. Development would require millions in investment, Wesley countered. Years of work, environmental impact studies, permits, all of which you're prepared to undertake, Emma said. Otherwise, why pursue this so aggressively? Wesley studied them both, seeming to recalculate his approach. What exactly are you proposing? Michael leaned forward. A new accord, one that honors the spirit of the original agreement while acknowledging current realities. I'm listening, Wesley said cautiously. We form a partnership, Michael explained. Your company provides the capital for resource development. Mitchell & Sons transitions its manufacturing operations to support the extraction, equipment, parts, infrastructure. And the profit split? Wesley asked. 50-50, Emma interjected. Equal partners. Wesley laughed, though without malice. You've got nerve, I'll give you that. My offer gives your family a clean exit and financial security. Your offer cheats us out of our rightful share, Michael corrected. Just as you believe our grandfather cheated yours. A silence fell over the room as Wesley considered their position. Finally, he spoke. 60-40. My company is majority partner, given the capital investment required. With guaranteed manufacturing contracts for Mitchell & Sons at market rates, Emma added quickly. For 10 years, Wesley countered. After that, we renegotiate based on performance. Michael glanced at Emma, who gave a slight nod. We'll need to discuss this with our father, of course, he said. But speaking for ourselves, those terms sound workable. And the matter of the fraudulent records? Wesley asked. Would become moot under a new partnership agreement, Michael replied evenly. All parties agreeing to release claims related to past disputes. Wesley leaned back, studying them both with new appreciation. You know, I expected to deal with Robert on this. Not his children. Times change, Emma said simply. Indeed they do. Wesley stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Discuss it with your father. I'll have my attorneys draft a preliminary agreement based on these terms. But understand, this offer expires in 1 week. The drive home was quiet, both siblings lost in thought. Finally, Emma broke the silence. Do you think Dad will go for it? Michael tightened his grip on the steering wheel. I don't know. It means admitting everything he's built is partially founded on his father's broken promise. And staying involved in a business he's nearly killed himself trying to save, Emma added. There's that too. Michael sighed. But it also means preserving the Mitchell name, securing the family's future. No small thing for a man like our father. When they arrived home, they found Robert in his study, looking better than he had in days. Elizabeth sat beside him, holding his hand. We know about your meeting with Wesley, their father said as they entered. Judith saw your car at his office. Michael placed the copy of the accord that Wesley had allowed them to take on the desk. It's all true. Everything he said about Grandpa William, the original agreement. Robert nodded slowly. I had a feeling it might be. There were always whispers, hints and things my father said over the years. He looked down at the document. I just never wanted to believe it. We've made a counteroffer, Emma said, carefully explaining the terms they discussed with Wesley. To their surprise, Robert didn't immediately reject the idea. Instead, he listened thoughtfully, occasionally glancing at Elizabeth, who remained supportive but silent. A partnership, he said when they'd finished. After all these years of treating the Wesleys as adversaries. It preserves the business, Michael pointed out. Keeps the Mitchell name on the buildings, guarantees work for our employees. but with Wesley as majority partner, Robert noted. For the resource development, Emma clarified. The manufacturing division would remain under our operational control. Robert fell silent, considering everything. Finally, he looked up at his children. You've both come a long way from where you were a week ago. Emma, you've stepped beyond just managing the day-to-day. And Michael, he shook his head in wonder. You've stepped back into a family business you once couldn't wait to escape. Michael hadn't thought of it that way, but his father was right. Somewhere in the past few days of investigation and negotiation, his perspective had shifted. I guess I needed to understand it first. All of it, the good and the bad. And now that you do, his father asked. Now I think there might be a place for me in it after all, Michael admitted. Not the place you planned, maybe, but a place nonetheless. Robert looked at his wife, who nodded encouragingly. Then I think, he said slowly, that William Mitchell's grandson and I have some terms to discuss with James Wesley. 2 weeks later, the Mitchell and Wesley families gathered in the conference room of Sullivan and Walsh, the same law firm that had witnessed the original accord nearly a century earlier. Michael watched as his father and James Wesley signed the new agreement, feeling a strange sense of history coming full circle. The partnership wasn't perfect. There had been hard negotiations, compromises on both sides. Robert had insisted on maintaining control of the manufacturing division, while Wesley had demanded oversight of all resource development. The profit split had landed at 55/45, slightly better than Wesley's initial offer. But the Mitchell family business would survive. More than that, it would transform, adapting to new realities while honoring its past, both the achievements and the mistakes. As the lawyers collected the documents, Michael stepped to the window, looking out at the town that had been shaped by both families over generations. Penny for your thoughts, Emma said, joining him. Just thinking about legacy, Michael replied. What we inherit, what we build, what we leave behind. And what we discover along the way, she added. Like the fact that you're actually pretty good at this business stuff. Michael smiled. Don't tell Dad. It'll go to his head. Speaking of which, Emma nodded toward their father, who was engaged in surprisingly amicable conversation with James Wesley. I haven't seen him this energized in years. Nothing like a good crisis to bring out the Mitchell fighting spirit, Michael observed. So, Emma said, bumping his shoulder lightly with hers. Does this mean Boston is in your rearview mirror? Michael had been asking himself the same question. His boss had been calling daily, growing increasingly impatient with his extended absence. The life he'd built there felt simultaneously distant and incomplete. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I'm not running away this time. Whatever I decide, it'll be a choice, not an escape. Emma nodded, understanding. Either way, we're in this together now. No more decades of silence and resentment. No more secrets, Michael agreed, echoing their earlier promise. As they rejoined the group for photographs and handshakes, Michael caught his mother's eye across the room. She gave him a quiet smile that spoke volumes: pride, relief, hope. The Mitchell family had weathered its crisis, confronted its past, and found a way forward, together. It wasn't the legacy his grandfather had envisioned, nor the one his father had fought to preserve. It was something new, something flawed but honest, built on truth rather than deception. And for the first time in years, Michael Mitchell felt truly at home in it.